Okay, Genesis chapter 32 is primarily where we will be at, but I'd like to read into chapter 33 because it helps us kind of conclude the story today, although admittedly I cut my preparation a little bit short. So Genesis 32, just recall that Jacob has left Laban. They made a covenant of peace last time and departed, and so now what we have before us is Jacob re-entering the promised land. That's what is happening, and we're going to uncover some interesting things here today as Jacob fears for his life and pleads before the face of God, and God comes to wrestle with him and deliver him from Esau. So, readers, if I could get our first reader to read the first 8 verses of Genesis chapter 32. Someone, thank you, Mrs. Cole. Go ahead. Yes, that's perfect. Just go ahead and stop right there, because next we're going to get into Jacob's prayer. So let's kind of breeze through this introduction a little bit as we go. Jacob enters the promised land, or in the region of that, as he heads towards that way. And who does he meet with first? Who or what, I guess, but who? Angels. He meets angels. Do we recall when Jacob last met an angel? Or angels? It was before Laban. So when Jacob was fleeing from Esau, as he was leaving the promised land, actually, he was met with angels. Remember at Bethel, he saw a vision, and the angels are ascending and descending, and then he spoke with the angel of the Lord and sought the blessing of God there. So both at his departure and now at his arrival, he's met at the entrance or the gateway to the promised land with angels, or the guardians of God. And so there's an interesting kind of parallel there as we think about the presence of God arrayed with angels, the Garden of Eden that we've already come out of, and the cherubim that were there. So keep that in mind. So Jacob's entering into the promised land, or the area, the land of God's blessing. And so Jacob draws a conclusion from this. He names the place Mahanaim, which means 2 camps. That's the definition of the word, or how it's understood. It means 2 camps. And when we think about what 2 camps is Jacob referring to, people disagree a little bit, but I think most that I read, and I agree, the 2 camps are probably the camp of the Lord and the camp of Jacob here. And it seems to imply that God has accompanied Jacob, or is the protector of Jacob. He is with him. So Jacob seems to understand that his camp is not alone, and he names the place Mahanaim, which means 2 camps. Now, the reason I say that, and also, is there seems to be a parallel here. The word angels is messengers, and right after we see that the Lord has his angels, we see that Jacob has his messengers and sends them on their way to go speak to Esau. And what we're going to see throughout this whole narrative, just to kind of orient us, is there is a parallel between Jacob going to face Esau and the fear that he sees with that, and Jacob facing the Lord and the fear that he should have before the Lord. And so the 2 events are we're always going back and forth between Jacob and his preparation to see Esau and then Jacob facing the Lord. And they go back and forth, back and forth. And even by the time we get over to chapter 33, Jacob's going to make this statement before Esau. He says in chapter 33, I switched Bibles and now all the verses are jumbled up. He says, I'll find the verse there in a second, but he says to Esau, the face of Esau is like the face of God to me. And so, verse 10, Jacob said, for I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably. And so even Jacob is going to see that parallel here. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're going to be comparing and contrasting Jacob as he approaches his brother, the one who stands or has an argument, a case against him, and as he stands before God. So Jacob sends a message, and in this message he sends to Esau. How does he refer to Esau, his brother? He doesn't say, hey, bro. He says, my Lord, my Lord. So he refers to him reverentially. It indicates his submission, his knowledge of Esau's position. The message that he relays is not elaborate. He pretty much just says, well, I've returned from Laban. I've been sojourning for 20 years, and I come with provisions. And he's intentionally looking for what from Esau? He's hoping to find favor. Yeah, he's hoping to find favor in the sight of his brother. So if I jumbled that up a little bit, in your handout 1.2, blank is favor. 1.3, Esau refers to Jacob as my Lord. And then the point here, as Jacob says, I've sojourned for 20 years and now I come with provisions, seems to be something of, Jacob is looking for maybe a little bit of pity from his brother, meaning I've been away from home for 20 years and I'm coming back, but also indicating I'm not expecting anything of you, Esau. It's meant to be favorable terms. It's a way of saying I'm coming in peace and I'm not coming looking for you to do anything for me, Esau. He's looking to find some peaceful resolution with Esau, some favor. Which we should then remember, why was Jacob sent away in the first place from the promised land? And specifically, do you remember the words that his mother spoke to him? Right. Correct. Yeah, that's okay. So Rebekah had told him, I'm going to send you to my brother Laban until the fury of Esau has subsided or gone away, and he has forgotten what you've done to him. Those were the two intents, his fury has subsided and he's forgotten. And it seems to be that at least on the first part, Jacob is hoping that maybe Esau has forgotten at this point. God's sending him back, and so maybe Esau has forgotten. Maybe there's peace, and so Jacob doesn't immediately send a great gift over to Esau or anything like that. He just sends word that I'm here. But what is the response that he gets? So these messengers go, they deliver this message, and now the messengers bring word back. I guess first off, does Esau send any word at all? No. So his actions are speaking for himself. And what are the actions of Esau? He comes with 400 men, okay? Now, if you think about this too, I was just reflecting. Remember Abraham and his 300 trained men? And there was a great number of men with Abraham that must have been given also to Isaac, and which must also be in some way connected with Esau as well, as Jacob was sent away from all the possessions of his fathers. So I'm not saying it's the same men. I'm just saying that they had skilled warriors there, and Jacob knew that. These 400 men were meant to be feared to some extent. And you don't send 400 men to greet a party just to welcome them and celebrate them. What do you send 400 men to do? To fight. For retribution, for retaliation, for war. So that's in 1.5 of your handout. Well, 1.4 was Esau's fury. He was looking for Esau's fury to be turned away and hoping he had forgotten. But in 1.5, Jacob is met with 400 men, and the army seems to be intent on inflicting retribution and wrath. Okay? So has Esau forgotten? Esau has not forgotten. 20 years later, this brother remembers. Or at least Jacob seems to presume that Esau remembers. What's Jacob's response to this? Split up the camp. First, what is his interior attitude, I guess? That'd be a better question. Fear. Great fear. I mean, Jacob is afraid for his life. He's about to be met by the wrath of one who accuses him. And I think some people helpfully pointed this out. What probably added even to Jacob's fear was that Jacob knew the wrath of Esau was not totally let's say, it doesn't make it right, but Jacob had truly cheated Esau. He had done wrong to his brother. So the conscience of Jacob here certainly plays into his fear and great dread as he sees this coming. Jacob hadn't forgotten either. He knows he's going back into the presence of Esau, and he knows what he had done. And so this is looming large in the background, is the conscience of Jacob here. Gill wrote, "Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, knowing what he had done to his brother in getting the birthright and blessing from him, and what an enmity he had conceived in his mind against him on that account, and remembering what he had said he would do to him, and therefore might fear that all his professions of respect to him were craftily and cunningly made to take him off his guard," meaning what cause does Esau have to trust Jacob? "And that he might the more easily fall into his hands, and especially when he heard there were 400 men with him. This struck a terror into him, and made him suspicious of an ill design against him. Though herein Jacob betrayed much weakness and want of faith, when God had promised again and again that he would be with him, and keep him, and protect him, and return him safe to the land of Canaan, and when he had just had such an appearance of angels to be his helper, guardians and protectors, yet still he divided the people that was with him, and the flock and the herds and the camels into two bands." So this word, two camps, is kind of repeated 3 times. The same word is not, but the meaning of the word, he named the place 2 camps, and then now he divides his garrison into 2 camps, and then he's going to pray to God and mention that he has become 2 camps. There seems to be something of a theme, and the best I could make of it is to say that on the one hand, at first Jacob recognizes the camp of the Lord is here, and in the next scene, he is in fear and dread and dividing his camp. And the whole strategy of dividing his camp is really so that he can give one half away to maybe escape with the other. It's like he's already given up. Well, I'll lose half, preferably the half with Leah, the wife that I don't like, and I'll save the other, right? And so just it's a contrast between, didn't you just see that the angels of the Lord are here, and now you're dividing your camp? So Jacob, it seems, has Jacob forgotten the accompanying presence of the Lord, his angels, and his promise that he had received? Remember, the last time he saw angels at Bethel, God had told him, "I will be with you until I do all that I have intended to do to you." So if God has intent on doing him good, which he does, Jacob should have remembered. Nevertheless, Jacob, at this point, with fear for his life, does what? And we haven't seen this from Jacob before. So let's read the next part. We didn't read it yet. So verse 9, and actually I would like to read through the end of the chapter. So someone wants to read a long portion. I see 2 hands. Garrett, go ahead. Verse 9 through the end of the chapter.
Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country, to your relatives, and I will prosper you.' I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he
Thank you. Okay, a lot packed into that second half there of the chapter. Backing up, though, we just read the whole chapter. So Jacob was afraid. Jacob splits his camp up, and then Jacob does what? He prays to God. He prays to the Lord. We haven't seen a prayer of Jacob like this in the past. This is a peculiar thing, and it strikes us often that trying and desperate times do often drive us to prayer, don't they? God uses these things for our good. So, this is Jacob, and the first time we see him turning away from his own cleverness and turning to rely on, or to lean on, to rest on, to trust in the promises that God has given him. And we're going to see a change in Jacob as we go through this. So, yeah.
That the Lord meets him too in the wrestling action after the calling upon, after the prayer.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, for sure. So, key elements of Jacob's prayer. Let's just pull some of these things out. This prayer is actually a really good example for us in our own praying. So, I have 6 blanks in 2.2, and it's in paragraph form there. But we can just talk through them. They're in order of Jacob's prayer. First, what does he do to God? Or do to God? How does he speak of God? He refers to God. He addresses God. So first, how he addresses God. He addresses God as the God of his fathers, the God who commanded Jacob to return to Canaan for blessing. And what is he doing there? Well, if you're the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God who has sent me to this land, what is he referring to? What does that sound like? You're the God of Abraham. You're the God of Isaac. You're the God who has sent me and called me to this land.
God of the living.
God of the living? And I think specifically the God of the covenant, of his promises to them. He's thinking of the God who's revealed himself in covenant to his fathers, is the same God that has called him to this land. So he's already trusting in God, but he addresses God as the one who has been faithful in the past and will be faithful again.
I think later in the scriptures too, we see the God of Abraham, Isaac, not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Speaking of resurrection, that these are still living with God. They are still in God.
Right. And I think I guess what's similar about both of those things is it's a prayer of faith when you address God as the God of the living, or the God who has been faithful, the God of his promise. He's not coming to God. Remember last time it was, God, if you will bless me, then I will be faithful to you. But here,
And also God who can be known, not just if you're up there.
right.
If you are.
How has God revealed himself in his word? That's how we address God back to him. We echo back to him. Who are you? I'm not a God of my own making, of my own imagination. This is the God who has revealed himself. Yeah, that's right. So he addresses God. Second, what does he do? So look for specific verses maybe to help point us in the right direction. So, God of my father Abraham, God of father Isaac, the Lord has said to me, return to your country, to your relatives. He says, I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. What does that sound like? He kind of does two things there. It's interesting.
No merit.
No merit, but much blessing, right? And what do we call no merit, much blessing? Blessing that is not merited, demerited. When God gives, what's that? Grace, yes. He praises God for his grace, which takes both of those things. Humility, meaning there's nothing there, and praise for what he has done, the blessing of God. You see the blessing, but you receive it as in humble spirit because there is no deserving. So he addresses God, he praises God for his grace. Third, then, he's very direct in verse 11. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother. He's specific and clear about his request for deliverance. And we should be with God in our prayer as well. Specifically, What am I praying to God for? God, deliver me. So he's clear in his request for deliverance. Fourth, he says this. Why is he praying this? For I fear him, speaking of Esau, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. So here, Jacob's very honest in his acknowledgement of his own weakness. In his confession of why he's coming. God, I am afraid. So fourth, he has a confession or acknowledgement of fear. Fifth, even as he says this, he's also afraid for the mothers and for the children. Now, when one is fervently praying on behalf of another, that there's good biblical example for that, but we call that a prayer of intercession. You're interceding on someone else's behalf. We don't mean that in an effectual way like Christ is our mediator, but we do imitate the priestly work of Christ as we pray for other people. And here Jacob prays for those who are in his care, like a priest in the home, as he says, Lord, my concern is for the mothers and the children whom you have with me. So fifth, intercession on behalf of the mothers and children. And then sixth, lastly, he returns to where he began the whole address to God. He says, in spite of this, for you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. And that's the end of his prayer. That is a repeating of what? I will make you as the sand of the sea. He's repeating God's word back to him. God's promise that he has given, he gives back to God. And when we do that, that's an act of trust. It's saying, God, I receive you, I take you, I understand you, I acknowledge you are who you said you are, and you will be faithful to what you've said. Therefore, I'm praying what you have already said back to you. Anyway, maybe we spent too much time on the prayer, but it's a good example. It's a good example of how we ought to pray to God. And what we're going to see is, so Jacob sought the face of God. So this is in your handout 2.3. After Jacob sought the face of God in prayer, now we flip back again. He prepares to see the face of Esau. So we get that specifically in verse. I should have brought my little notebook that I had these underlined, so it won't be. Perhaps, there we go. So in verse 20, he prepares this gift, and he gives the reason for it in verse 20. He says, behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So he pleads before the face of God. Now he prepares to see the face of his accuser. He brings costly gifts that are prepared and arranged with ceremony. And they all go, what's the order here? Jacob goes first, and then the gifts, they go before him. So the gifts to appease, the gifts to make peace, the gifts to satisfy, go before Jacob as he goes to meet his accuser. These words, what are the two key words? So zooming in on that verse 20 specifically, Jacob's hope is that he will appease him and that afterwards he will be accepted. Those words, appease and accept, are the same words that are going to be used throughout Exodus and Leviticus to talk about the offerings that the Israelites would give to appease the wrath of God and that he would accept their sacrifice carrying sin away. So it's the same dynamic, if you will, though certainly much heightened in the case of God. But that's what's going on here. Jacob is saying, I cannot come into the presence of Esau without gifts, without something to make amends for the treachery that I have dealt with him. So, then we come to this very peculiar part. That night, Jacob also, after he sent the gifts, he also sends his wives and children ahead of him to meet Esau first. And this is kind of peculiar. On the one hand, is there honor in sending your wife and children ahead of you in a dangerous situation to make them more vulnerable? There's no honor in that. So there is nothing honorable in jeopardizing the life of his family. But at the same time, in this situation, it's definitely an indication of humility and entrusting himself to God and to the power of Esau as he does this. In other words, if Jacob was coming to swindle Esau again or to trick Esau again, you wouldn't do that by sending your wife and your children ahead. He's laying all of it down in front of Esau and saying, I'm your servant, in essence, in this way. So then Jacob comes then himself to, he sends his wife and children across the fjord of the Jabbok, and he's about to cross the same fjord. And so the Jabbok is a tributary of what river? You want to guess? What's the main river in the Promised Land that you always hear of? The Jordan. So it's a tributary of the Jordan. This is the symbolic crossing of Jacob crossing into the land. And just as he's about to cross, first, the main point of this whole text right here, the reason he sends his wife and children along, is that it leaves him alone. That's the big emphasis. He's alone, and Jacob's about to cross over into the Promised Land, and he's met with an unknown assailant. A man comes to wrestle him. Now, we just read the account. First off, the man wrestles him for quite some period of time, right? This is in the middle of the night all the way until the break of day. The man is at first unsuccessful in prevailing over Jacob using his natural strength. Right? The day is breaking, and the man saw that he was unsuccessful in prevailing against Jacob. So then what does he do? What does this man do? He touches the socket of his hip. And the word touch there is appropriate. That's the point. Jacob took a sudden blow of natural force. This was the touch of one who had a supernatural power. But with a simple touch, this man who could wrestle all night with this being and prevail with just a touch, the hip socket is put out of joint now. And so Jacob then refuses to let this man go, right? The man says, well, let me go. The dawn is here. And Jacob says, I will not let you go until you have blessed me. It seems like at this point, Jacob understands there is something peculiar about this interaction going on. If at first he was met with a man, at this point he understands this is no mere man. Jacob is desperate, clinging on, saying, you must bless me. You must bless me. So the man turns, I'm losing my voice. The man turns and asks Jacob his name. He says, you will no longer be called Jacob. He gives him a new name, and this name indicates both struggle or striving with God, but also victory or success in it. You have striven with God and with man and have won. What's the point of this? I know I'm almost up on time, but I want to read. So this event is referred to in Hosea chapter 12, which helps shed some light on this. So Hosea chapter 12, I'll do my best to deal with this quickly and briefly. The first 6 verses here, the prophet is coming and he's delivering the message of God, but God is coming with a charge against the nation of Israel. He has a case. He says, I have a case or a cause against you because Israel has been dealing faithlessly with God. And then he's going to refer to this struggle. So listen to this. Ephraim feeds on wind and pursues the east wind continually. He multiplies lies and violence. Moreover, he makes a covenant with Assyria, and oil is carried to Egypt. The Lord also has a dispute with Judah and will punish Jacob according to his ways. He will repay him according to his deeds. In the womb, he took his brother by the heel, and in his maturity, he contended with God. Yes, he wrestled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He found him at Bethel, and there he spoke with us. Even the Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord is his name. Therefore, return to your God, observe kindness and justice, and wait for your God continually. Now this is kind of poetic language, and because I'm right at the end of my time, I'm just going to skip to sort of interpreting this. But the way that the prophet is doing this is he's essentially saying, look, God has a case against you, Israel, but you are like Jacob. And remember, Jacob strove with God. Jacob would not let God go until God had blessed him. Remember, Jacob found God at Bethel. In other words, there's an earnestness here that the prophet wants to see in God's people, an earnestness of going to God. God has a case against you. Therefore, you should be. I take this as a positive example in some sense of how they are to pursue after God with vigor. Verse 6 being the conclusion. Therefore, return to your God, observe kindness and justice. Man, I do not have time to kind of draw this out to what it is indicating here, but let's see if we can just for a minute. Jacob was afraid for his life, and he was pleading with God for help in this time of battle. God answers by standing in his way, by making him wrestle all night long, by dislocating his hip. Now, how many of us would think, this is what I need right before I meet my enemy, is to be tired from a wrestling all night, to have a dislocated hip, and to be impeded from going on? None of us would think that is any way an answer to prayer at all. And yet, through this, did Jacob have any actual power over this one who is wrestling? He says, no, I wrestled with the face of God and lived. So Jacob thinks of this as a miracle that he survived this after, in retrospect, as he sees who it was. So God could have done things in a different way, but he wrestles all night with him until Jacob, out of desperation, clings to God, as Hosea says, with weeping and tears, God, bless me. At which point God gives him the assurance of, he changes his name. This is the same thing that God had done with Abraham. When Abraham sought greater assurance, God gives him a name that indicates how he will be victorious, meaning God will be faithful to him in his promise, even as he struggles and strives against God and man. So God, what is God, the gift of the limp, you could say? What is the gift of the limp as God wrestles here? Well, through it, God gave him certainly assurance of blessing, but also Jacob has understood that he wrestled with God and yet was alive. He's striven with the God of heaven, before whom he had more guilt and more vulnerability than he had before Esau, and he lived by the mercy of God who had delivered him. In other words, God forces Jacob to wrestle with himself before he deals with Esau. As he comes to the promised land, before you're going to face the face of Esau and deal with him, you're going to wrestle with God. And God is saying, my promise is with you. God puts Jacob in this position where he is desperate for his life, desperate and pleading and helpless now. Jacob is desperate and pleading and now helpless because of his limp, but he knows the promise of God is with him. So he gives Jacob the courage and boldness to do what he needs to do and face his brother. He gives him the humility. Now Jacob has nothing but to lay down and bow down before his brother. And so when he comes at the next verse, and I know we're skipping through so much, but when he comes to the next chapter and says, Esau, the face of Esau is like the face of God to me, I take that to be that there's a parallel between the fear that Jacob had before the face of Esau and the fear which he ought to have had before the face of God. To see Esau's face and remain alive is parallel here to seeing God's face and remaining alive. In other words, because Jacob has pardon in Esau's eyes, he knows he has pardon in God's eyes. Because he received pardon in God's eyes, he had courage to face Esau, his accuser, and remain in the land. So there's a lot here to meditate on. I think the most immediate application for me is just, here we see Jacob first pleading with God in his prayer. And many times we've been in that situation where we've pled with God. We think, okay, now that I've prayed with God, certainly now is the time where God's going to bring deliverance. And actually it was in that time that God sent a further obstacle into Jacob's life, a further wrestling, dislocating his hip and causing him in desperate need acknowledge, I've got nothing unless, God, you bless me. And I think in the example that Hosea brings up, like with tears and persistence, this is a great example in our prayer life. Say, God, I will not let you go until you bless me according to your promises. Like there's just a, I don't know, the way God works is mysterious, but he puts us in those hard providences so that we would not think of ourselves as sufficient in any way or powerful in any way, but all that we have is to plead and to wrestle until God would bless us. So, anyway, that's a wrap for that lesson. There's a lot to meditate here. Sorry, if you have time in the week, just read the passage through and think on it and think in Hosea. Yeah, there's another verse I wanted to go to, but let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for your providence. I pray that you would not leave us until you have blessed us, Lord. Though at times we feel that we've been given a limp, yet through that, Lord, may we trust you all the more. May we trust you as we know our sin and our guilt before you. We know our undeserving of any goodness. We know we have enemies. But you've promised in Christ, Lord, to bless us. You've promised that we will reign and rule with you. And so, Lord, grant us, I pray, a sure confidence in you, a humility before God and man, favor with God and man. I pray in our strugglings in this life, persevere us, I pray. In your name, amen.